Working on making a massive lasagna.
What is up, YouTube? I've got a really fun little tutorial for today. We're going to do this animated voice note effect. It's actually something that I did in a production or a film that was about the British response to the pandemic.
Because the thing about us Brits is, when this life gives us we make fun of it.
She's working on making a massive lasagna.
Sharing memes doesn't mean that we're taking this tragedy lightly.
And I think this is a super valuable technique just because people are always looking for a way of representing voice notes on screen and coming up with a kind of clever way to do stuff with audio messages. Let's check it out. Alright, so I've got the final comp playing here. So let's just break it down right from the beginning and build the whole thing again from scratch. Let's just make a new composition. 1920, 1080, duration probably only needs to be about 10 seconds long. Drag in my footage that I've already got prepped. Nice. And then we'll just trim the composition to be exactly the right length. So I'm actually going to press N to set the end. And then I'm going to go Command-Shift-X, and that'll just trim the composition to the length that I want it. So we're missing a frame. Let's throw another frame in at the end there. So the first thing we need to do is we need to do a camera track, 3D camera track on this. So we're going to go into Track Camera down here in the bottom right. Probably going to set this into Detailed Analysis. What this is going to do is this is basically going to create a virtual camera inside of After Effects, which exactly replicates the camera that I've used to shoot this shot in real life. So we're just going to give that a minute to process. So it's finished processing. This is a classic error. This always seems to happen whenever I try and do a 3D camera track. It always comes up with layer size must match composition and use default transform values. I wish it would just tell you this before you started. Very annoying, means you have to do the whole thing again, but it is very easy to fix. Basically, the reason that it's not working is because the scale of this clip is 50%. It's because it's a 4K shot, whereas my composition settings is only 1920 by 1080. So what we're gonna have to do is we're gonna have to pre-compose this. Pre-compose, I'm gonna call it move attributes into a new composition, that's important. We'll just call that footage 2. So now if we hit S and go onto the scale of this, you can see that it's set at 100%, so it should work. So I'm going to press track camera again. Okay, and then this time our camera of track has worked. So if I just click on the 3D camera track here, you can see we've got all these lovely track points which we can use to set up our 3D scene. So let's set up a plane sort of on the phone. So it's just going to click on a couple of these points and then press Shift to select multiple points at the same time. Basically just want to select a nice kind of plane along the edge of this phone, because this phone is going to become our sort of ground plane for this whole process. So actually, do you know what? I don't think that's going to work very well because we have all these reflections in it that are confusing it. So let's just pick some points that are around the edge of the phone. So this pen's good as well. And then there, yeah, and that looks like a good, nice level ground plane. So we're going to right click and we're going to go set ground plane and origin. And that's just going to default our coordinate system to being in the right place. And then we're going to right click again and say, let's say create solid and camera. Nice, so now we've got this kind of track solid sitting on top of the phone. That looks like a pretty good track to me. I think that's pretty fixed onto the phone where it needs to be. So I'm just going to rename this track solid base, or let's call it ground plane actually. This is going to be super useful when we come to building the 3D scene. Probably just turn it off for now, we don't actually need it. But let's start to create this audio waveform. I've got another comp that I've made here which is called audio, so I'm going to drag that in here, and this is actually just an audio layer. So if we go into it, all it is
they're actually working on making a massive lasagna.
There's no video, it's just audio. So you can see here if I turn on and off the video, it doesn't actually do anything, but what's important is we have this little speaker icon here which says play audio from this layer.
They're actually working on.
And we're going to use this audio layer to create the audio waveform using an effect called audio waveform. So I'm going to type in audio waveform. So it comes up here. Let's just drag and drop that onto the audio layer here. So you can see nothing really happens straight away. That might actually be because I've got the layer as being invisible. So let me make the layer visible. Let's also put it on top of our footage. There we go. And now we have an audio waveform. I'm actually going to mute this for now because I don't want to be hearing it each time we play it. But you can see that the audio waveform is there and it's responding the way that we want it to. So you've got quite a few options in the settings up here. You can play around with it being analog or digital. Digital is what I've used for this effect. It might look quite cool if you used an analog wave. Let's go back to digital. Thickness, pump that up a bit. And you can see we've got this kind of nice waveform being displayed on screen. Anyway, I'm going to put in the settings that I've used to make this effect. You can obviously play around with it and do your own thing. So set the color to pink, and then I've set the outside color to let's set that to a slightly lighter pink, just so it sort of fades off into white. Maybe not too different. That looks good to me. And then what's important is that the start is on the very edge of the composition. So we're going to set that start point, which is currently on 192, we're going to set that to 0. And then the end point likewise needs to be at the very far end of the composition, so we'll set that to 1920. So in my previous comp, I had the displayed samples at 73, so I'm just going to match that. And then I had the thickness at 10 and the height at 1000. So that's actually pretty much it when it comes to setting up our waveform. Now what we need to do is we need to wrap this round in a circle. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to use an effect called CC cylinder. So I'm going to drag that onto our audio layer. And we can see straight away we create this cool cylinder effect. And the best thing about this effect is that it's using the camera that we've created to actually put this cylinder in real 3D space. So you can see it's moving around with the camera, but it doesn't look like it's in the right position. So we're going to need to move it around a little bit. So we're going to go into position in CC cylinder. So we need to just drag the position around to try and get it into the right place for where we want it to be. Let's also increase the radius. Let's go up to like 200 on that. I think it could even be a bit bigger than 200, maybe 250. That looks about right. So just moving it around by adjusting these position X, Y, Z coordinates. Yeah, and then let's move it up as well so it's above the phone. Oh, well, that seems to be pushing it back. And then Y, move it up. So that's looking good. That's pretty much where I had it before. I think we're going to make it even bigger. Let's go for 300. So let's pull it a little bit closer towards us. And maybe push it up just a bit more. And there we go. Now we've got our circular floating waveform floating above the phone in the position that we want it to be in. I'm actually going to increase the height even more. Let's go up to 1500. And just get these nice big tall blocks poking out. Let's also add just a little bit of rotation as well. I think we're going to tilt it down so it's sort of pointing towards the camera. Just playing around with these controls here. So you can do it however you want really. Just whatever looks good.
Actually working on making a massive lasagna.
So that's looking good to me. Now let's just hop into the light section. So we could turn up the light intensity a little bit, maybe 150. Let's make this a little bit brighter. And then we can change the direction that our light's coming from as well. So to actually match where the light is coming from in our scene, it looks like the light's sort of coming from sort of backlit from over here. So actually this light direction looks quite good. Might put the light height up a bit, yeah. Because we want this thing to be kind of glowing. This isn't super sophisticated, but it is kind of nice to be able to just play around with your lighting and your shading to make it sort of match. So that's pretty much it when it comes to building this 3D waveform. Obviously in the original composition, if I go back to it, you can see we've got this text in the center as well. And the way that I created that, let's just jump into it for now. So it's called Words and Glitch. This is really simple. We've got this kind of pulsating play button here, and then we have some text that just writes out at the right time. So if I go into this composition, you can see it. We're just going from one word to the next word to the next word. And then we've got this play icon here, which is kind of pulsating. So let me just show you how I made that flash. Press U to reveal the keyframes. You can see I keyframe the opacity at 100 and then to 50. And then to 50. And then I've done a little expression here where you basically, what you do is you alt click on the stopwatch. And then we're going to go loop out like that with a capital O. And that's just going to make the thing loop the whole way through. So it's just going to go 150, 150 to give us a bit of a pulse. So let's just go back into the comp above that. So the other thing that we've got going on is we have this kind of fizzy displacement. Let me just zoom in on that so you can see. It's just giving a bit of a kind of fizz around the edges, which makes it look a little bit cooler. So I'll show you how I created that. On this adjustment layer here, we've got this displacement map. And the displacement map basically takes a layer and then creates a displacement in accordance with the pixels and the colors and stuff, which you can change by changing these sliders and stuff. So you can make it really intense, the displacement. And what we're doing is we're using this layer, which is called Rainbow Texture 2. So let me just show you what that looks like. It's basically this layer. It's like a cool, jazzy, rainbow, glitchy texture layer. And it's using that to displace anything underneath the displacement layer. So we'll turn that off. We feed that into our displacement map, and it basically just gives us this kind of cool glitchy edge. So you can see the words are kind of just sitting inside the center of our ring. So let's put this all into our new composition. So I'm just going to copy and paste words and glitch, which is this comp that I've made. And let's put that into our new composition here, Control V. So the angle and stuff is wrong because I've made this composition different. Make sure that it's also a 3D layer. If it's not a 3D layer, it's not going to respond to the camera. So turn that onto a 3D layer. So let's just take the positions that we've used for the cylinder, because that should be the center of our cylinder. So if we type that into the position values of this words layer, we should end up positioning it right in the very center where we want it. So our x is minus 1240. So let's go minus 1240. Y is minus 1360. That's looking good. And then our Z is 350. Okay, 350. Okay, that's not perfect. Well, tell you what, let's just move it around using the XYZ dragging tools like that. It might just be because the center of the different effects isn't in the same place. But if I drag that there, yeah, that looks like it's in the right place to me. I'm actually going to duplicate this layer, and then I'm going to set the parent of this new one that I've made to layer above it. And then I'm just going to set the offset in the Z to, let's say like, yeah, 20 pixels. So basically what I've done is I've created another layer, which is just sitting behind it in 3-dimensional space. And it gives it this kind of cool sort of 3D shadow effect, basically. So let's take this bottom layer. And the reason that we've done the parent is that if we want to move the top layer, you can see the second layer will move with it. So if we do make any changes, then the two layers are going to respond together. And let's just set this one that's a little bit further back. We're going to press T to turn the opacity. Let's turn the opacity down to like 25%. So it's just like a kind of background sort of shadow, but just makes this feel a bit more 3-dimensional and a bit cooler. I also want the foreground layer to be, let's make it 100%. Nice. So you can see this is basically taking shape. What we're probably going to do is let's apply a little glow effect as well to make this really stand out. So we're going to go glow, stylize, chuck the glow on there. That's looking much better. Let's turn the radius up to like 20, so it really spreads out. Let's turn the color into white as well. So that looks good. I'm going to copy and paste that glow effect. I'm going to put that on my second words layer as well. And then let's also put it onto our audio ring. So let's make our audio ring glow. So let's just minimize these two effects. Control V. Nice. And then for our audio ring, let's turn the glow up to 2, so it glows even more. And let's turn the radius up to 50. So we've got this nice pink glow sort of floating around it. It's already looking a bit cooler. So that is actually it when it comes to the basics of this effect. If you want to just give it a go, then feel free to download the project file from the description below. For the rest of this tutorial, I'm going to talk about how I created the reflections in the phone screen, and also how I did these sort of cool light beams that are coming out of the edge of the animation. So stay around if you want to learn that. But if not, please do like and subscribe and tag me in anything you make. It'd be cool to see. Cool, so we've got our glow now, we've got our composition taking shape. The next thing we need to do is we need to add the reflection in the phone screen. If I just take you back to the original one that I made, as you can see, I put lots of effort into making this cool reflection in the phone screen. In fact, I can turn off the top layer and you can see we've just got the reflections here playing by themselves. So let's have a go creating this then. Basically, what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to duplicate all of this stuff, and then we're going to need to flip it upside down, and then we're going to need to position it in the phone screen. So in order to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of these layers of stuff that we made. I'm going to press Command D to duplicate them all. And then let me just drag them all so they're next to each other. Bit confusing that we've got lots of layers called the same thing. So let's quickly pre-compose this. Pre-compose this, call it reflections. Great. So now if I go into the reflections layer, you can see, well, the problem is, if I just turn the alpha off, because these are all 3D layers doing stuff in 3D space, the thing only takes shape when we have our 3D camera. So what I need to do is I also need to copy the camera as well. So I'm going to press Command C, take this into our reflections layer, press Command V, and now you can see everything starting to take shape. So I'm going to go back into our comp here, and you can see we've got a duplication, and this is all just called reflections. So let's press S to turn on the scale, unclick the linked icon, and then turn that on to -100. And you can see now we're going to turn it upside down. So that's starting to look like what we want. And if I just move this around, but the problem with this is that our reflections composition is bouncing around and it's moving around loads. And the reason for this is because we've got this sort of double 3D camera problem going on. We've got a 3D camera in here, which is causing it to move around. And that doesn't actually match up with the 3D camera that we have in this composition because now we've flipped it upside down. So to solve this problem, what we need to do is we need to basically freeze this 3D camera. So we should basically just pick a view that we like and we should freeze it there. Because if you think about it, it might be a little hard to get your head around how this actually works, but the 3D camera move is coming in this composition. It doesn't need to come from this. This should just be static. The reason we need the 3D camera is because we need this to sort of enable the CC cylinder effect that we've put on here, but the camera itself shouldn't be moving. So let's just do that. So I'm going to hit U to open up the camera properties. I like this frame. I think this is the right angle for it. So I'm just going to keep the keyframes of position and orientation that the camera is at here and set that for the whole thing. So let me just delete all the keyframes before and delete all the keyframes afterwards. And now we should have a frozen object. And this is great. This is exactly what we want. So now we should have a frozen camera, which is just giving us this one position and this one view, which is what we want. So that's awesome. So let's go back into our main composition here. And now you can see that our reflection isn't bouncing around and it's not moving around as much as it was, but it's also not moving the right way and not doing the right thing. So what we need to do is we need to now make this into a 3D layer. Like this. And you can see it's now moving around with our 3D camera the way that we want it to. But it's not in the right position. It needs to be sort of on the phone screen. So let's just do some moving. So let's push that Z-axis there. In fact, now we can use our ground plane because our ground plane is pretty much the position that we want our reflections to be at. So our ground plane is at 0, 0, 0. So if I just set that to 0, and then 0, and then 0, that should put it in the middle of our phone screen where we want the reflections to be. And hey presto, you can see it's kind of moving in the right position now and it feels like it's attached onto the phone. So let's just do some other stuff to make this seem a bit more realistic. Let's scale it up. Hit uniform scale on that. Because we flipped it upside down, these controls are kind of not doing the things that we're used to them doing. I don't want to move anything on the y-axis. I don't want it to go up or down anymore because we've set the y-axis using the ground plane. But we can push this z-axis and this x-axis around just to get it in the right position. I think it needs to still be a little bit bigger. So going S, scaling it up. We're actually scaling it down because of the we're actually scaling it down because it's just scaling it up a little bit. Let's move it across just over here. So that looks to me like a pretty good reflection in the phone screen. So what we're going to do, let's add a bit of blur. So we're typing blur into the effects. Let's put on a good old Gaussian blur. Can't go wrong with that. Crank that up to like maybe 30. Maybe a little bit too much, probably about 20. And we have a good looking reflection. Let's just make sure that this layer is sitting underneath our, well, it doesn't look like they have a crossover, but it does look like they could interfere with each other. So let's just make sure it sits underneath the top layer, the audio layer. I might add just a little bit of transparency into it as well. I don't think that it would be as bold and as bright as that. So let's turn the opacity down to like 90, maybe less, 75. That's looking good. And then the final thing that we need to do is we're going to need to mask out the edges so it just sits on top of this phone screen. So let's give that a go. So I'm on the reflections layer. I'm going to click on my pen tool up here, and then I'm just going to simply draw a box around the edge of the phone screen. Trying to get these nice curved corners in as well. So what you do to add a curve is you click and drag, and you can just sort of put the corners in as you're drawing the point. So we'll do one just on this side, and then we'll click and drag around the other side of the corner, all the way up to this back corner here, and let's just jump across there. And hey presto, we've got our mask. Let's just set a keyframe for our mask so it sits in the right position. So mask path, click there to set a keyframe. Let's drag all the way to the end. So our mask really isn't in the right position. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to the normal selection tool, and I'm just going to drag all of my points here. So you can see that the mask, just by setting those 2 keyframes, we've done a pretty good job of tracking the mask the whole way through. You could do this frame by frame, and if you really wanted to get a perfect result, you probably should do that. But I think that actually, it's only sort of every 10 keyframes that really matter. So let's just sort of zoom in a bit and then adjust some of these keyframes to give us a slightly nicer mask. I'm pretty happy with those reflections. I think that really looks like it's really reflected in the screen. The other thing we can do is we can just add a bit of a mask feather. So let's just add 15 pixels of feather to the edge of the mask, and it will just slowly blend out a little bit. Now what you could do, and what I actually did in the final comp, is I added another layer of reflections in the table, because you can see the table's kind of glossy as well. So I'll just show you. I'm not going to show you exactly how I did that because it's pretty much the same process. But if I go into the base here, you can see we've got this one layer, which is floating stuff 2, that's sitting on top of the phone there. And then we've got the second layer, which is just sitting on the table. So it's pretty much the same thing. We've just scaled it up even more, and we've drawn a different mask around it to mask out some of the other stuff. So let me just show you that. I'm going to turn the opacity up on that. And I've added even more blur. So I've got 100 pixels of blur on that. Anyway, so now we've got that mask drawn. This is pretty much it. This is pretty much the final thing. Let's just go back into our main comp here. And you can see that the other thing that I've done, I've got to confess that I've added in a paid plugin to really bring this to life a little bit more. And this plugin is called Trapcode Shine. If I turn that off, you can see this is what it looks like without. Turn this on, and it gives it this really cool kind of like radiant glow. You can move around the center point and create these awesome light beams. And it's just something I like to use that adds another level to this. So yeah, here's the plugin. It's called Trapcode Shine. It's made by Red Giant. You can see some of the awesome things that you can do with it. I haven't been paid to promote this. I just like using it. I think it's really cool. So yeah, $99. If you've got a cool project where you might want to use this effect, I'd say it's definitely worth it. So that's pretty much it. This is pretty much what I created originally. You can see I've sort of fine-tuned it a little bit more. This is perhaps a little bit bigger and the reflections are a little bit better. So there's plenty of scope to keep tweaking it and making it a lot better, but that is the fundamental principle of how this is done. And considering how common it is to have to bring to life something on an iPhone these days, I think that this is a pretty cool thing that you could potentially use to do that and make something that would be potentially quite boring into something that's quite interesting. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I hope it made sense. Please do tag me in anything that you make, and I look forward to seeing it.